Welcome back, everybody, to the channel. This was supposed to be our first ever live stream on the new YouTube channel, but YouTube got a weird kind of rule, I guess, that you can't live stream in your first like 24 hours of trying to stream. So this could be a little recording for you guys. But I'm joined by Nick Farabaugh of Steelers Now. Me and Nick go way back. One of the best Steelers minds, NFL draft minds out there. So I'm excited to bring him on the channel, talk some ball. Give our thoughts on a lot of players in this upcoming draft class. But first, Nick, first off, I appreciate you coming on, brother. But how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. I appreciate you having me on as always. It's always a good time to talk ball, especially with you, man. I know we got to talk ball a little bit at the combine, but it's been a minute just where I've been having the time to just sit down and talk some ball with people. Period. Because draft season, free agency, man, it moves 100,000 miles per minute, and Pitt also has their spring stuff, so it's been crazy for me.
Yeah, I know they've been keeping you busy over there, man. Yeah, Nick's a busy dude. He does the Steelers stuff over there for Pittsburgh Sports Now, but he also covers Pitt, and of course everything that comes with the Steelers, man. Like we say all the time, like football season it doesn't ever end. Like it literally goes from the season ends, and then right then it's the draft cycle, free agency, even like the dead period of what I would call like football season, which is probably like early summer. But you're still covering like mini camp and up until training camp. There's really not much of a break. It's really a year-long thing for the people that do this for a living. So I do appreciate you coming on and chop it up with me. I know we had talked a little bit about kind of off the stream, wanting to talk about some cornerback prospects in the 2023 class. This is a really good group, man. I broke down a lot of these guys for the channel. I wanted to kind of get your thoughts on like where you see kind of the top of the class and just some overall general thoughts about each of these players or how you would rank them.
Yeah, man, this is an absurd corner class. It's one of the best ever, I think. Really, I mean, if you rank a top 100 prospects, I haven't done that this year. I've kind of ditched that idea. I don't like that as much anymore. But if you are ranking a top 100 prospects list, you probably have at least 15 of these guys in there. It's that deep. And then even when you get past that, it's not like, oh, it dries up. There's some legitimate day three guys we're talking about could be starters in this league. And with the infusion of wide receiver talent into the NFL in recent years, it feels like this corner class is much needed as well. So my thoughts are, man, you look at any archetype of corner you want, there's a good type there. If you want a guy that's more speed and can play off, you got that. If you want a long press guy, a tall, long, rangy guy, you got that. If you want a guy that can do a little bit of everything, play, multiple man, play zone, play off, play press, you got that. You want a guy that can play in the slot and be a blitzer, you got that. If you want a primarily slot corner coverage guy that's on pass downs, that's there. If you want a guy that can play safety and corner and can move over as kind of this piece, you got that. Like there is nothing that this class lacks in archetypes. You have a specific archetype in every team. I say this, every single team, all 32 teams should draft a corner in this class. I don't
Absolutely.
care how good your corner room is. Draft somebody. It's one of those groups where you will find a good corner in this class at some type of archetype. So I mean, I love this corner group, and it's going to be interesting to see how, to me, the board falls because I'm not sure how to predict that because there are going to be so many good corners. So, as the question is, our team's going to wait? And I think that's going to be the interesting thing to see is are you not going to draft a Joey Porter Jr. or a Deontay Banks because later you can get a Cam Smith, for example, or maybe you can get an Emmanuel Forbes or something like that. Even the guys that maybe I'm not high on have so much to sell with them. Like I'm sure we'll talk about him, but Keely Ringo, right? Like I have a lot of problems with Keely Ringo, but you can't tell me that guy doesn't have sky high potential. Like
Hmm.
any class, I would love to draft a Keely Ringo in the second round. So I look at this and man, it's a great class for whatever you may want. If you want to double dip into this class, you can do that very comfortably. So great class. Best position group in my opinion, pound for pound in this class. I think it's better than the tight end class, and I like the tight end class, but I think this is better. It's one of the best position groups in my opinion we have had. I started scouting in 2018, the 2018 draft. This is up there in the top 3 ever position classes to me in those drafts since then.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, kind of one of the things that I've been saying just kind of throughout the cycles, like you said, if you don't need a corner, you should still draft one. And if you need a corner, you need to draft two because that's how deep this class is. I mean, it's got it all. It's got the potential up at the top. There's a lot of guys, I feel like, at the top of this draft that have that CB1 type potential. Even into day three, I mean, I don't think that this draft class, just having gotten through a good amount of players right now. I don't think this draft class is incredibly deep, except for corner. And like just with how many of these guys there are, that's gonna push some of these other guys down draft boards into that round 4, round 5 range, which like I'm sitting here trying to sort these guys out. I've tweeted this a couple times. Like even trying to get a top 10 list together is so difficult because all these guys have such varying different skill sets. And like you said, like trying to like even rank these guys. I know like you're probably about pressed for time, even more so than I am with everything you got going on. But it's hard to put together like even a rankings list because for me, it's just like trying to figure out what these guys do well, what they struggle with, or what they have to improve on. There's so many different guys that you can plug into different systems and get different results depending on what you need. And I think that's the question that you're going to have to ask is what type of player do you need at this position? And then how early are you willing to, address that need?
Yeah, I think that's the big thing. I think every team's board is going to look very different because they're going to need different things. And all these guys are so close to each other. Even at the top, you got Gonzalez and Witherspoon, who really aren't that far apart. Whoever you may prefer. For example, I actually would have Witherspoon as my corner one. But if
That's
I were
interesting.
the Steelers, I would have Gonzalez as my corner one. Like that's kind of how I would view this draft. It's completely up to what you need, and like this is a class that has the top guys that you want. It has the top of the class, it has the middle of the class, it has the depth of a class, it has it all, and it has it in the slot, it has it on the outside, it has it in the versatile department, it has it on the everything. I mean, this is a class that has ball hawks, that has guys that maybe don't have as much ball production, but are guys that can make up for it in other ways. If you're a physical downhill type of team that really likes their corners to come up in the screen game and the run game, you got that archetype certainly in Joey Porter Jr. You have just so many different guys in this group. I do think this. I think though, one thing that I will say is I think there's a defined top four. To me, at least, there's a top four, and then there's a bit of a drop off. Now, that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that the other guys aren't really, really good, and they would be first rounders in probably a lot of other classes. But to me, I think there's a clear top four of this class, and that top four to me is 100% Christian Gonzalez, Devin Witherspoon, Joey Porter Jr., and Deontay Banks. That is the top four to me. In my order, if I were just evaluating cornerback play I like, I'd probably go Witherspoon, Gonzalez, Porter Jr., Banks. I have a few more reservations about Deontay Banks than some people will. I really like the guy, though. Good player. But I think after that, when you get to the Emmanuel Forbes, Cam Smith, Keely Ringo, Julius Brents, Tyreek Stevenson, that kind of group of the draft, I think there's a little bit of a drop off from those. I think you have things that you were worried about with those guys from an immediate standpoint or maybe from a
Mhm.
projection future standpoint. For me, like Brents is a really good player, but I don't feel like you got much to tap into there. Like, I think what you see with Julius Brents is what you get, which is a really high floor, long player, but I don't think he's going to have a ton of potential. I think he's so polished in what he does already. He's kind of there, right? But you look at Akili Ringo, and that guy has so much to learn that the ceiling is really high. But I don't have to
Only
worry
20
about that with
years old.
Christian Gonzalez, who has the measurables of Akili Ringo, better measurables at that. But I know his floor is higher, and I know he's going to be a stud. So this is a group to me that has defined tiers to them. But the third tier is as good as any year's second tier, and that's what makes it special.
Yeah, for sure. So let me kind of get your thoughts on this is a kind of a question that I feel like I've answered a lot on Twitter. Just people asking me my thoughts on Porter, my thoughts on Banks, but I kind of want to hear your perspective because you spent a little bit of time around Porter just personally as well. But for me, I prefer Banks over Porter, and it's not this it's not this Grand Canyon size gap. Or I think they're both first round players, and I do agree with your assessment that these top four corners are the top 4 corners in the draft. Like this is how I would rank them. Would be Gonzalez 1, Witherspoon 2, Banks at 3, Porter at 4. Um, but I think for me personally with Banks, I like the ability for him to play in press. He can do some of the same things that Porter can do in press. Obviously, he's not as long. Nobody is with Porter's freakish length, but can do some things at the line of scrimmage in terms of disrupting receivers' timing. But I also love the way he can play off coverage. Like he can play from a pedal, extremely fluid guy. He can play, I feel like, in any different scheme, any type of alignment that you want him to. I feel like he's got the skill set to do that, along with, being a 4-3 guy. And I think that 4-3 speed really shows up on tape. I was watching the Michigan game from last year, and they had this little speedy little track star kind of. They were running him around the formation, but him and Banks got into a couple different, track meets on the outside, and Banks was just running right with him in the hip pocket. And I was like, dude, the 4-3 speed, I mean, it is all over his tape. But Porter, I like him as well. But I wanted to get your thoughts on why, how you have him ranked kind of above Deontay Banks.
Yeah, they're interesting because I think Porter has his own concerns while Banks has his own. One, Banks just has injury concerns, durability concerns. He's been
That
hurt a
we just
lot.
haven't seen a lot of him.
Yeah, I think that gets me a little bit antsy. I like the potential. I like the tape, but it is limited.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something to think about. So Porter has far more tape on the resume. Both of them don't have very good ball production. I think that's the interesting part here. But I actually feel more comfortable projecting Joey Porter Jr.'s ball production increase because I feel like a lot of his lack of ball production was the fact that he just was not targeted that much this year,
Mm-hmm.
too. Now, I think they're more similar players than you would think. Just looking off it, right? Because Deontay Banks is about 2 or 3 inches legitimately shorter, and Porter obviously has more length than he does. But I think that's kind of the interesting thing is they're both lengthy guys. They can play press. I think Joey Porter Jr.'s hip flexibility is actually a little underrated. I think he can really flip those hips. I think he has a far, far, far more higher ceiling than a lot of people think. We're talking about a legit corner 1 ceiling there. I think Banks has that too because his athleticism is phenomenal. But I think Porter Jr. has a chance to be a little bit more versatile than people think he can be. I love that he has that kind of physicality and that length because I think it gives him some interesting things that you can do with him as a blitzer standpoint. He's got legitimately solid speed for his size. His ball skills at the catch point haven't shown up on the ball production sheet, but you can see those traits there. And that's
Mm-hmm.
what I think is my thing here and why I put him slightly over over Banks. And the reason why is because in this modern NFL right now, to me, I need playmakers. I want playmakers. Banks is going to be a really good player. I'm just not sure if that ball production is ever going to show up with Deontay Banks. And that's the thing to me is, Joey Porter Jr., I think, has that ball production potential. I think you see it in the way he goes up and gets the balls, the way he is in position to make plays on footballs. I think he's got that ability to do it. So I'll trade a little less scheme diversity, which is obviously what you have in Deontay Banks, for a little bit more ball production. I put a premium on those guys. That's why I love ball hawks. That's why I'm a big Emmanuel Forbes fan, for example. He's my corner 5. I love that. I know he's got his concerns too because he's so light, but I'll bet on those ball producers, man, because you need that. And it's as simple as sometimes that little trait to me when you are looking at players in the modern NFL and how they suit to that. Because when we get deep in January, defenses often don't worry about stopping offense. It's about
Turning
who
it
gets
over.
those key turnovers. And I think, a guy like Joey Porter Jr. has more ability to get those key turnovers throughout the season. But I think these are 2 extremely good players. You look at Deontay Banks and you get a guy that is more versatile, a guy that's faster, a guy that can play in multiple different ways. He's got a dog mentality. I think that they both have similar mentalities. Again, I think a little bit more similar than people might think. I think, though, you have a little bit more scheme diversity with Deontay Banks and with Joey Porter Jr. I think you have a little bit more playmaking ability there. At least, I should say playmaking potential because it hasn't shown up tangibly just yet, but I think it's there.
Yeah. One of the things too, like you mentioned with Banks, like them being similar in terms of just the lack of ball production. That's kind of why I'm just a little bit hesitant about like kind of how the Steelers could potentially view them. Maybe I like pick 17 because I don't think either guy's got any chance. I mean, maybe Banks does at 32, but I would be surprised if either one of those guys made it to 32, just with the way that they tested. Um, but there was a rep I was talking about Banks with running with that track star from Michigan. He's hip for hip with him, in phase, and the ball gets thrown. The ball's actually on his outside shoulder, and he kind of just flips around, flips his hips. Ball hits him right in the hands and drops it. And then I watched one of the things about Porter, man, that I actually liked when I went back and watched his 22 tape. Um, he was a little less grabby. I liked that. But one of the things I like about Porter is like when they were putting him as like a cloud corner and like cover 2, cover 6, he was really good at like jumping routes and like getting downhill. Like I saw him against in the Purdue game. He jumped like a quick like option route on that to the outside. Unfortunately, it also hit his hands and kind of dropped to the turf as well. So like both these guys, I think Banks had like 8 or 9 pass deflections. I don't know what Porter had, but Porter was like barely targeted. They were like really leaving him alone for the most part, especially in conference play. But both those guys, I mean, that's probably going to be the key. Is like how do their ball productions improve at the next level to kind of take them up a territory to really be able to hit their potential. But they are interesting players. I'd be happy with either of those guys ended up in Pittsburgh for sure. But aside from the top corners, let's get to I know you and I have talked about Julius Brents like kind of like offhand a bunch. I feel like Brents has gained so much steam, maybe not as much in the national media, but like Twitter seems to love him right now. So I don't know if you could call him a sleeper anymore, but I didn't know if there was like a mid-round corner or a late-round corner that like you particularly like that you wanted to throw, their name out there before we kind of move on to receivers.
Yeah, I mean, there's a few guys in that mid round range. Not the Brents is like a 49 type guy. I kind of talked about that entire tier, how I like Forbes in there, I like Cam Smith. But
Mm-hmm.
there's a few guys in that next range. Corey Trice, I like a lot out of Purdue. I think he's really solid. I think people aren't giving him enough love. He's a true sleeper to me. That some people really love, but I don't feel like a lot of people have caught on. Cameron Mitchell out of Northwestern, I think, is a really solid player too. The Big Ten had a really good group of corners this year. Just a really solid player there. You kind of look at other guys and you say, man, there are so many players. Clark Phillips, I like him. I know he's undersized, but if I'm getting a guy on the slot that I know can be a dog, I'm taking that guy at 80. Like that's a good pick at 80 to me if you need a slot corner. Shamari Connor out of VT, I like this guy. I watched Shamari Connor play in the ACC multiple years. Obviously, as I cover Pitt, I have been able to kind of get exposure to these guys. And Shamari Connor, man, playmaker, smart, comes up and he is willing to hit. He's willing to really, really just lay the wood. He's a leader. I like the fact that he is a captain. I like that. I just like those intangible traits that he brings to the table. Kytrell Clark out of Louisville. I'll go right to where you are, man. I
That's
like
my
Kytrell
guy.
Clark a little bit too. Playmaker. Had a really good process to me. This is a guy that really gained steam down the mark, if you will. So there's a lot of good players in this group. I could name so many corners in this class that just pop out to you right on tape. And there are plenty of sleepers to really be excited about in this class. So, I mean, those are just a few. The top of the groups. I feel like the Steelers are going to dip into that top group at least a little bit, whether that's in that tier 1 or the tier 2. Another guy I didn't even mention, Darius Rush. I have to mention Darius Rush, man. That's a good player. I know Cam Smith gets all the love, but Darius Rush is a really good football
It's a good
player.
player.
Man, there's just a lot of good players in this class. And you can't not be excited about what you see from this group. And there's so many guys. Garrett Williams out of Syracuse. I know he got that big injury at the ACL, but you could get him at a discount on day 3, and that guy could turn into a 7-8 year starter for your team. I mean, that's the type of players we're talking about here.
Yeah, Garrett Williams, man, that was a guy who I know going into last year's cycle, it was like September, October. I had Garrett Williams in the top 5 of my corners. I mean, that's how high I was on him. I absolutely love his footwork. I mean, he is so clean in his transitions, incredibly quick, has some ball skills. Unfortunately, Syracuse really didn't let him press very much, but I think he can do pretty much whatever it is you want him to do on defense. And Trice. I mean, you talk about if you were to be a team at the top of the draft where you miss out on a guy like Joey Porter, I think Trice could have some similar type traits at a discounted rate. You look at Trice. I think he's 6'2", 6'3", with nice length, has a bunch of press man experience. I want to say he had like 8 or 9 pass breakups last year. He was a guy. Fifth-year senior, believe he tore his ACL last year or 2021. So like we might not have even seen him. We've witnessed this multiple times. Like guys normally coming off an ACL, that it's not that first year that they're really back to themselves. It's usually the year after that. So yeah, Keetrell Clark too, like a guy who played on the outside his first several years at Louisville, and then kicked into the slot last season. I watched this dude at the Shrine Bowl, and I thought he was the best player there, like not corner. I thought he was the best player. I mean, he was all over the field, blowing up screens, picking off passes. He was fantastic during that week, and it'd be interesting to see kind of how early he comes off the board. Let's get into a little bit of receiver talk. I want to talk a little bit about this receiver class. To me is it's underwhelming just because of we've been so freaking spoiled over the last several years. Going that receiver class last year, which I had 5 guys with round 1 grades and a couple more that were like just on the fringe. And this year, like it's hard to see. I would be surprised, in my opinion, if we got more than one kind of wide receiver, one alpha type receiver out of this class when it's all said and done. I will be surprised if that happens. But how do you view the top of the receiver class? Like who do you like the most? Does anybody in particular stand out, kind of head and shoulders in your mind?
Not really. Listen, it's not a great class. I think there are some nice mid-round guys that can give you complementary roles, but I agree with
Mm-hmm.
you. There's probably one wide receiver, one out of this group, if even. It's just not a great class, and so I think you're going to see a lot of these receivers be on the board longer than people think. Sometimes people say, "Well, scarcity forces them up more." I think in this case, it's the opposite. I think it's going to push them down, because here's the thing: there are a lot of wide receivers in the league already that these guys just aren't going to able to come in and play over. That's kind of the thing about drafting rookie receivers is you expect them to come in and you expect them to kind of give you a boost. Well, I don't think that's going to be a ton of guys in this class. Now, the top of the group is very underwhelming too. I think there is a clear wide receiver one though. To me, it's Jackson Smith and Jigba. I don't really think that anyone else is super, super close. I just think he's super smooth. I think he's the surest thing of this group. Like he's going to be a high end two, regardless to me. He's just a super smooth route runner, got great hands. He understands kind of where to drop in zones. He's just a really solid player, and he's got inside out versatility. He is a good player, and he's fast enough. I don't care what anyone says about his speed. He's not a burner, but you can't tell me that guy's slower than Juju was, and Juju, is a solid guy in the league, but he's going to be a better player than that. He's a really good football player. Then the next group is kind of interesting because I'm not in love with a lot of these guys. I really like Zay Flowers. I think he's going to be a good player. Could be a Tyler Lockett-esque player, I think, in his career. I still really like Jordan Addison. People, I think are overthinking Jordan Addison. Just go back and watch his tape with Kenny Pickett. Go back and watch the tape when he was on the field this year. That's a good receiver. He knows how to separate.
Yep.
Now, I think what people aren't getting at is I think Addison might be a little bit more slot specific than people are letting on. He's really slight, but I think he can play outside a little bit. But give me him at the Z. I don't really want him at the X a ton. So I think he's a good player though. But I'm not a huge Jalen Hyatt fan. I think there's a lot to be concerned about there. I think Quentin Johnston is a huge boomer bust potential guy.
Yep.
Like I like them. I liked him when I watched TCU, but you watch the tape, man. There's a lot of concerns there with Quentin Johnston. But if he hits, he could be your wide receiver one. If he doesn't, man, we're talking about bust potential right up here. So he's a very big type of bust potential guy. But then you kind of get into the next tier where I think there are some solid guys that could be good wide receiver threes. I'm talking about Josh Downs, Cedric Tillman, Jaden Reed. I like those guys. I like, Xavier Hutchinson, I think has a big slot archetype type. I don't even think this class lacks that depth. I think the class has enough depth to where you can get guys to round out your receiving core. I think it's a really good class if you need some special teamers. I think that's cool. I think you can get some late day 3 guys. It's just not a good group overall, though. Usually down at the Senior Bowl, we see a guy come in and just dominate the whole week. That never really happened this year. All the guys that were supposed to, like Rashee Rice didn't really have a good week. Jaden Reed was the best guy down there. I still maintain he was the best at the Senior Bowl. But there's just not a lot of guys, even the potential guys, the guys that test out of the water and are freaky. Like, we didn't get a lot of those guys this year. The closest to that was Bryce Ford Wheaton, who's out of WVU, who I think has some very Chase Claypool traits to him.
Good
But
or
it's just,
bad.
it's not a great class. And so I think it's a better class for mid-round slots. I think for the Steelers, that is really good because they need some mid-round slot receivers to me. I don't see them going early with it. I just don't think the value is going to be there. Like when we're talking about where the Steelers are going to go in the first 2 picks, it's going to be a BPA based kind of selection to me. It's hard to envision that being wide receiver unless maybe you get a Jordan Addison at 32. Like,
Yeah.
that's kind of how I view it. But a mid-round slot guy, a Mingo, Charlie Jones, Jaden Reed, someone like that, Xavier Hutchinson, those guys make a lot more sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Addison is still, I'm still rolling with him as wide receiver 1. I have him at 1, Jackson Smith and Jigba at 2, Quentin Johnson at 3, Zay Flowers at 4. And the real reason for that is, like, Addison, man, like, I see so much Calvin Ridley and Jordan Addison. And, like, I don't know, like, we could probably debate whether Calvin Ridley's a wide receiver 1 or what, but, like, he's a top 32 wide receiver in the league when he's been out there on the field. And I just see them winning in similar ways, just like really technical route runners, excel getting in and out of their breaks. I mean, we've seen a guy in Pittsburgh like that really, really make a name for himself, throughout his career already, make himself a little bit of money already in Deontay Johnson. So I think Addison, I do agree that, he has, to me, inside outside versatility, but I have no reservations about him in the slot because you'll get him free releases more often. And I think Addison, one of the things I loved about him, especially when I was watching Pickett last summer, when I was after the draft, kind of just doing more work on Pickett, Addison is not afraid to extend outside of his frame over the middle of the field. And I absolutely love that. Like, he is really slight, only 170 pounds, but he's fearless over the middle. And I really like that about him. As far as JSN, I mean, to me, he's a pretty easy translation to the league, right? Like, I think he's slot specific, but I'm not really sure that it matters because he's literally such a technical route runner. He sets guys up. He can get guys to open up their hips prematurely. He is a master at manipulating, like, pace and tempo to, like, kind of lull guys to sleep. And then Quentin Johnson, like, when I was watching Johnson, man, throughout the season, like, I would catch, like, bits and pieces of TCU games and you see those highlights. But what's weird about him is he does things incredibly well for his size. Like, you look at the way he can separate underneath. You look at the way that he quickly transitions from receiver to runner. Like, there is some instantaneous transition with him where he'll catch a dig 15 yards over the middle of the field, and then, like, he plants 1 foot and it's a hard drive upfield. He can accelerate, get to his top speed quick. But then, like, there's things that you would expect him to be able to do as a bigger receiver that he just doesn't do consistently. Like, he doesn't high point the football. He doesn't play big at the catch point. He's not overly physical. So he's like a smaller receiver trapped in a bigger receiver's body. Now, that's why I think the range of outcomes with him could be so vast. It's like, you can teach guys, to use their hands more at the catch point, to high point the football, but you can't teach guys to be, 6'2", 6'3", and his size. So it'll be fascinating to see kind of how he's used at the next level, especially early on while he kind of molds into his game. But you brought up a couple names that I particularly like. I really, really like Cedric Tillman. Cedric Tillman is my wide receiver 5 for this class. In a class, you mentioned Jonathan Mingo as well. In a class without a lot of bigger receivers, like, this class has a ton of short slot speed guys. This class does not have a lot of big body, true X type receivers. Tillman is one of those guys that I particularly like. And if you go back to the 2021 film, Tillman's a player, man. Like, I'm surprised that the Steelers have interest. Well, it could be medical reasons for the top 30. I'm not really sure if they met with him at the combine formally or informally. I can't remember, but I'm surprised a little bit that they showed interest just because I'm not sure he's really what they need, but I like the interest regardless because he's such a damn good player. He really is.
Yeah, I think he was the best senior in the class. Like by far. I watched him play Pitt, and at in Heinz Field, Acrisure Stadium, whatever. It's Heinz Field to me still.
Sure.
But I watched him play there, man. Just such a physically imposing dude. His ball skills are all there. He's got that versatility. He's a really big dude already. Like I don't need to get that guy into a strength and training regiment program like at all. He's NFL ready to go body wise. He just is. He's got all of that checked off. Good candidate at 49 if I were the Steelers. Like that's a good pick to me. I would take Cedric Tillman at 49. That seems right to me. And I look at some of the guys you were talking about, the smaller guys. Yeah, there are a few in here that make more sense. But to me, the Steelers have that already. Like they don't really need, if we're talking Steelers specific wide receiver need, like they don't really need a small slot guy, right? That's Calvin Austin. Like, okay, they have Calvin Austin and Anthony Miller's not that big either. So they kind of have that already. And one of those two is making the roster at the very least. Gunnar Olszewski's also there. And so,
Mm-hmm.
one of those guys is at the very least making the roster. They need a big bodied slot guy. That's what they need. They either need to do that or they need to make Pat Freiermuth that guy. That's what they need to do. And they need to draft a tight end. Like that's kind of where the Steelers are in terms of what they need to do in the slot. So to me, a guy like Tillman is like what the doctor ordered. Perfect player. If Jackson Smith and Jigba were at 32 or the Steelers were picking a little later in the first round, I think he makes a lot of sense. Addison would make sense just because he's a BPA type at 32.
Yeah.
That's the type of guy that you would pick regardless, just because he can separate so easily. How many years have we been talking about, oh my goodness, they just need someone else to separate, not named Deontay Johnson. I mean, that has been one of the things, you talked about. You kind of doubled up on contested catch guys when you got George Pickens and Chase Claypool there. Well, now Claypool's gone. So to me, let's get the best of both worlds. Get a Tillman who has the suddenness to stop and start and get some separation in the middle to intermediate range, but also has the ability to maybe stretch that field a little bit on the outside and still go get that ball. I like Cedric Tillman because he's not going to just be slot specific. Because look at the depth right now at outside receiver for the Steelers. This is an untalked about topic. There's really no one. I mean,
Yeah.
really, Miles Boykin probably ends up finding his way back, I think, eventually. But there's really no one. What happens if George Pickens gets hurt next year?
Yeah.
Like, what happens? So to me, like a Cedric Tillman, well, okay, George Pickens gets hurt. You might lose your big slot, but I'd rather get Tillman on the outside at that point then, because I think he has inside-out versatility. So I think he can be a guy where they can mix and match a little bit more, but he'd be your primary slot. But if, Lord forbid, one of Deontay Johnson or George Pickens would get hurt, I could trust him to go outside, and I would much rather have that than, I would rather go with that kind of committee on the inside with, an Anthony Miller and a Calvin Austin with Tillman on the outside, or whoever you maybe put that big guy out there. So
Right.
to me, the Steelers have met with a lot of different types of slot guys, but I think they need a big bodied guy and a guy that can play outside. I think that would really be helpful. So I think Cedric Tillman makes a lot of sense. Of their pre-draft visits that they hosted with the receivers, he's my favorite.
Yeah, and you mentioned some of the same characteristics that I think fall under Jonathan Mingo as well. Like I really like Jonathan Mingo, man. Like just in terms of a Steelers fit, Mingo's the hype around him seems to be weirdly buzzing lately. So maybe he does have a higher stock than I was originally thinking. But if you could get him around that round 3, round 4 range, I think that's a fantastic pick. I mean, I look at Mingo and I see a lot of the same kind of big slot type characteristics that maybe we hoped that Chase Claypool would be able to tap into last year when they kind of moved him around. It took Mingo a little bit, to kind of, I guess, find his footing at Ole Miss, but I think he's pretty sudden. And I also think that he's a developing route runner, along with being, 6'2", 220 pounds. He does have the foot injury that kind of limited him during his junior season. But he played like 250 plus slot snaps, last season under Lane Kiffin. And I think when you watch his film, there's enough ability to stretch the field. He's got some explosive play potential. After the catch, that thick frame is going to show up because these smaller defensive backs, look at all these defensive backs in this class. It's 170, 180 pounds. Those guys are not going to want to come up and tackle 220-pound receivers all the time. And probably like my favorite thing about Mingo, just in the 2 or 3 games that I watched of his tape recently, they used him in a variety of different ways, different alignments to get him out in space as a blocker. That is something the Steelers have. This is an underrated, you talk about underrated things that we don't talk about enough. Having a good perimeter blocker out there to set the point on screens, to help your perimeter run game. Claypool was never that guy. He was a pathetic blocker, especially in the slot. Freiermuth, he's a little bit better on the perimeter than he is in line, but he's not an impactful blocker either. But I've watched Mingo literally take guys completely out of the frame on some of these screen passes to the outside. So he's a guy who really intrigues me. I am interested to see what he does at the next level, because when you look at how he tested extremely well. He certainly looks the part. Some of the hype I think is getting maybe a little bit out of control. Like I saw a tweet today comparing him to AJ Brown, and like we don't need to go there. But he's a good player, man. I would be pretty excited to pair a big-bodied slot receiver like Mingo with a Calvin Austin, with an Anthony Miller, and some of those smaller slot guys that are already on the roster. So
yeah, listen, I think Jonathan Mingo is interesting. I think he does have some. When you were talking about AJ Brown, the prospect, he does have some interesting qualities that kind of stick with that. And what I'm talking about is, the rack, the playmaking strength, kind of that ability. He doesn't have the all-around game that AJ Brown had, though. But he has some interesting things. I think the blocking point is a really good one. Another reason they need a big slot. They were having Gunnar Olszewski out there last year trying to block in front for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. And Gunnar fights, man, but he is not a good blocker. So this is what I'm talking about, right? When I'm saying, Mingo, kind of Tillman, Hutchinson fits that too. If they want to wait till like the 4th to get him. Ford Wheaton as a late round pick makes a lot of sense to me too in that archetype. I just look at a Mingo too and say, there are concerns there. He doesn't really extend outside his frame very often. So for me, with the guy like Kenny Pickett, I would like a big target that can go outside his frame and get some really big catches. That's the one concern I have with Jonathan Mingo, and that's why I like Cedric Tillman the best. But I think Jonathan Mingo has a lot of good things you like there. But he's going to be a slot guy. I think you can use him on the jet sweeps really well in this offense too.
They were lining him up at tight end.
Yeah. I mean, really, like I'll say this. I'm going to parse out this. I never get why people hate the jet sweep in Matt Canada's offense. Like, if you look at a per stats basis, that was a hugely productive play last year where they ripped off like 7 yards at a time on that play. Like, they should be using that more, to be quite honest with you. I thought at times it just disappeared. And the one thing that I have hated about Matt Canada's offense over the years has just been, dude, work something off the jet motion. Like, get a jet motion series offense going. Use the jet sweep, play fake it, and then hit someone creatively off it. Like, Mingo could be that guy that could open it up, right? So you could have a big 6'2", 220 guy in the slot doing that. And then on the next play, here comes 5'6" Calvin Austin running a 4.29 doing it. Like, I think that's interesting. I do think the one thing we haven't talked about, I know we're talking about receivers, but I kind of mentioned it briefly, is the idea that maybe they could draft a tight end. I think that's very interesting as a possibility, where you kind of just make Pat Freiermuth the slot receiver. And, you make him the big slot guy. He kind of takes Claypool's role a little bit more. And you get an inline blocker that can just kick butt up front. And, that's never been Muth, really. He's not really a great inline blocker. They relied on Gentry to do it. Gentry even played more than Muth did at times last year because of it. I mean, Gentry's back. But to me, I don't know. I think drafting a tight end in this class is a pretty interesting idea, because I think it opens up a lot for the offense. You can be more double personneled. I think you don't have to play Gentry as much then. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways they can go with this, but I think it's pretty clear what they need in that slot is a big body that can give them some blocking and some real production as a size threat.
Yeah, and just to tap into a little bit of the kind of the jet sweep thing, I do agree with you. The jet sweep, it can't be, the integral kind of only piece to your offense, but it can be a nice changeup. And part of my real issue with Canada is just the fact that these concepts, they don't seem to work off one another. Like he doesn't build concepts off one of another in sequence plays together. You know what I'm saying? Like that's kind of what you're talking about as well too. Like having some of those successful jet sweeps or things like that. Like there's never like the added layer behind it, to tap into the passing game and stuff like that. So that to me is one of the things I'd like to see improve. Really for next season. We do have a couple questions just from Twitter that I'm going to get into, and then we'll kind of wrap this stream up. But because I know you're a busy man, but this one's from my guy Jay Primetime. I know he's a YouTube subscriber. If the top 3 tackles and corners are gone, what's the next move for the Steelers? I am going to assume, just in having talked to him in the past, I'm pretty sure he's probably talking about Paris Johnson, Skoronski, and Broderick Jones, I'm guessing, as the top 3 tackles. And then we'll just say, for the sake of the question, we'll talk Porter, Gonzalez, Witherspoon off the board. Like where do you think they would go in that scenario? That's a tough one.
Yeah, you're asking me to hit kind of 3 different spots, right? So all right. So Witherspoon and Gonzalez to me are probably not going to be there, first of all.
I agree.
One of those is going top 10, if not both. And the Commanders pick right in front of the Steelers. To me, that is a corner heavy group. If we're talking about the tackles on top of that, first of all, I don't even really think that the Steelers are a great place for Skoronski to land. After the Suamalo signing, I just think it takes away a lot of the appeal of a Peter Skoronski for this team, just because you kind of have to play him at tackle. And if he doesn't work out, he's kind of stuck, right? Because I don't really think that they're going to draft Skoronski with the idea of pushing him inside. They're just going to draft John Michael Schmitz if they really want to upgrade there. So you're talking about Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones. So to me, like Paris Johnson's a pipe dream. That guy's gone at way before. Like that's the trade up scenario right there.
Mm-hmm.
That's where they're going to go up and get him. Or would they go up 3 or 4 spots to go get Broderick Jones? I think that's the other question. Do they see such a stark separation between the top 3 tackles and say Darnell Wright and DeJuan Jones? I think that's the question. Are they willing to draft Jones and Wright later on, or are they willing to draft Wright at 17? I think that's the other question. Is Darnell Wright a 4 where he's like right there with them, or is he a drop down for them? I think that's the question we have to answer when we're talking about that. So if we see that happen, let's say Jones, Johnson, Skoronski, if top 3 tackles and corners, so that includes Joey Porter Jr., I think. So let's say Joey Porter Jr. is gone too. So he's gone, Witherspoon's gone, Gonzalez is gone. Well, at that point, you open up the cachet to me. That to me is trade back scenario right there. I still maintain, everyone's talking about, well, trade up. This team should trade back. Get more picks. You're in a nice sweet spot there where you could trade back 5 or 6 spots, and I could get Deonte Banks. I could get, I could draft Darnell right there. I could draft Brian Brzee. I could draft someone like that, and I'd be comfortable with drafting them. That's a trade back scenario too, where maybe you get a Jordan Addison, someone like that to me. So my first on my board would be trade back. But if you have to stick at 17, which could be possible, I'm looking at Brzee. I'm looking at Lucas Van Ness, I think, there as well. Brian Branch would be very interesting to me with just kind of what he can do. I would look at, if we're thinking about A1 options that are probably still there, I would personally, at that point, draft Deonte Banks. That's what I would do. If I had to stick at 17, I just think he's such a good player and he's such worthy of the value. And people will say, well, what about the Maryland stuff? Well, his tape's really good. He tested like a freak. He's got it all there. So I'm a big fan of Deonte Banks. I'd probably look towards Deonte Banks, but I think at that point, your top 3 corners, top 3 tackles are gone. you have a very limited, narrow scope of players you really would like. It's really Banks, Branch, Addison. Torrance isn't in there anymore because he's so guard specific. It's kind of like, are you comfortable enough drafting Darnell? Right. I'm not. I don't think he's worthy of the 17th overall selection. If I traded back and got picks and picked him late in the first, I can do that very easily. So to me, that's a trade back scenario. I just think they're in a really good spot to trade back. But linebacker isn't on the board either. I just don't think there's a linebacker good enough to draft there. The D line is so narrow for them. I mean, you have to consider in that scenario, is Jalen Carter there? I mean, the intangible qualities is kind of whatever, but if he makes it to 17, I think you have to have that discussion. But Brzee, I think, makes a lot of sense there. I think Van Ness is the sleeper of this draft that the Steelers could really draft. That's a Steelers-like player right there. They could really make him like Cam Hayward's kind of understudy for 2 years, and he could play. I'm not huge on Van Ness right now to come in and step in, but if I'm telling him to sit behind Cam Hayward for 2 years, like Van Ness could hit his ceiling at that point. Like, that's a good situation to draft Lucas Van Ness into. I'm just not sure this team right now is willing to invest in the 2025 season when you have a second-year quarterback that you need to be helping out.
Yeah.
So to me, yeah, I don't know. Trade back to me seems like the option here. That's kind of what I would do. But if I had to stick there, I'd probably go with Deontay Banks.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've kind of been saying this on Twitter too. Like, if they took Banks at 17, like some people will freak out, I think, because, he didn't really get onto a lot of these bigger boards or bigger draft media talk shows or anything like that until a little bit later in the process. But I do think the tape and just the athleticism, the testing kind of matches to him, being worthy of that type of value. I also think, I would be comfortable taking Wright at 17. Like, he's actually OT2 for me personally. And that's only really because I think that he's just a plug and play guy. Like, he doesn't have like screaming athleticism, which may limit a little bit of his upside. But I just look at what he can already do, especially as a pass protector, how technically refined he is with his hands. He's got a really bully ball mentality, which I appreciate. I think that, and he's done it against top competition. Yeah. And I know me and you, I think we're texting or DMing during that Tennessee Alabama game. And, he put on a show against Will Anderson. So he's one of my favorite prospects in the class, just in terms of guys who I'm a little bit higher on than others. Van Ness is interesting. A lot of people that I'm sure that sub to this channel also like see me talk on the All Steelers channel as well. But I have some issues with Van Ness as an edge defender, and I preface this by saying there are things to like. Obviously, he's an incredibly powerful dude. I don't think he's as explosive as he tested, but he is an explosive guy with his hands. If he gets into your chest, you're going backwards and probably on the ground. I do like his temperament and demeanor. He plays extremely hard, and hustle and effort, especially as a pass rusher, will get you sacks in the league. It gives you a nice floor. My questions with him are like, if he can't just run through your face, like he doesn't really have a move. Like he doesn't really win the outside corner well. I talked with Nick Martin, my co-host on the Draft Talk show, about this as well. Like he views Van Ness as an interior defensive lineman, like as a 3-tech. And I actually, like, when I listened to him say that, I thought about that and was like, man, like if you could put 20 pounds on this dude and he could maintain that type of athleticism, and with his power profile already being what it is and him getting stronger, like he really could be like a really, really dynamic inside rusher at the next level. So he is an interesting player to keep an eye on for the Steelers.
I mean, they draft him. He's Cam Hayward's replacement to me. Like, that's why you draft Lucas Van Ness, is to be the next Cam Hayward. Like, that is what you were drafting him for. You're not drafting him to be the outside linebacker 3. Like, you already have that. If you're going to get a tweener that can play edge or interior D-line, you already have it. It's DeMarvin Leal. Like, you don't need DeMarvin Leal again, and you don't need to spend first-round draft capital to get the same guy that has the same tweener-ish profile. Mm-hmm. I'd fully commit him to play 5 and 3, 3-tech. Like, that's where I would put Van Ness at. Now, the question you can ask me is, well, are you willing to just take that chance on him, or would you just rather draft the guy who's already doing that, and that's Brian Brzee? But I think that's the interesting question. But, like, I work with Alan Saunders at Steelers now, and Alan's a big fan of Lucas Van Ness. In fact, he's like really big on drafting Lucas Van Ness at 17 because he sees a lot of, it's a lot of projection there with Lucas Van Ness on the inside. But, and I'm going to very preface this by saying, don't overreact to it. But he told me, there's a lot of JJ Watt traits in that guy. And I think he's right. It's not like he's going to become JJ Watt. I'm not saying that, but like the power profile, the explosiveness, the ability to be very versatile, probably even at a 20-pound weight. Like that's the potential of Lucas Van Ness. That's why a lot of guys love him. Like I think Dane Brugler had him in his top 10 in the top 100. So like there's a reason these guys love him. I don't really think the Steelers are the team to draft him. I don't think it's smart to invest in the D line 2 years away when Lucas Van Ness probably won't play a ton this year, first of all, if you're transitioning him back to the inside. And what is your main goal this offseason? Make Kenny Pickett have that second year league. Like, give him the best ecosystem to do that. I'm not sure how Van Ness really helps that out. I feel like a guy like, Brzee would help that out because you'd get significant contributions there and it would beef up your defense. Because if you draft Van Ness, to me, like, he'll play a little bit, but I still probably need another 5-tech. Like, it's kind of weird. So I don't know. 17 without the top 3 corners and top 3 tackles, I think is actually quite likely. I think Joey Porter Jr. being gone 17 is a very realistic possibility. I think the Commanders quite like him. So I don't know. I think it's going to be very interesting. I think Deonte Banks, though, at 17 makes a lot of sense to me if that happens. Darnell Wright, I think, makes a lot of sense there, too. I think those end up being your top 2 on the board right there if that happens. I think it's Wright and Banks. And then kind of from wherever you go there, I think it's all about trading down or making a reach that you really don't want to make.
Yeah. So look, but just before we get out of here, I'm reading through some of these other questions, and it looks like these questions we've already kind of hit about trading up, trading down. So we'll kind of lump those in with that one. But I want to ask you, I'm gonna put you on the spot. 3 guys, doesn't matter like what pick or anything like that. Give me 3 names if you had to bet like this dude is a Steeler come Sunday after draft weekend or Saturday night after draft weekend. Give me your 3 names you would bet most likely to become Steelers on draft weekend.
3 most likely names. All right. The first one, Keanu Benton. That dude just has Steeler written all over him. The track of interest is just all there. They have really, really hounded that guy. They went to his pro day. Kyle Dunbar did, that is. They met with him pre-draft. They met with him at the combine. He's a Steelers-like player because he comes from a very Steelers-like scheme. They need an interior D lineman. He's probably at the right value. That guy makes a lot of sense to me as a Steeler. Keanu Benton would be my first. My second, man, I keep feeling it more and more. I'll tell you what, if he's there at 17, I don't know how he's not the pick. It's just such an obvious pick. And the Steelers don't really stray from the obvious very often. I'll tell you what, if he's there at 17, Joey Porter Jr. is going to be a Steeler. Like, I just have a hard time shaking that feeling. He lines up with everything they want. NFL bloodlines. He's pretty young for coming out. He's that physical guy that they've talked about. If you heard Grady Brown talk at the Senior Bowl while he was DCing for the national team down there, and he was talking about what they want. He said, you better have length, you better come up, and you better be good in run support. And that's what Joey Porter Jr. is. Like, I don't know. They described Joey Porter Jr. perfectly to a T. It just makes a lot of sense for them. That's such a Mike Tomlin pick, Joey Porter Jr. So I think that makes a lot of sense to me. The other guy that I would bet it on is DeJuan Jones. Like, I just think that, like, I would not be surprised if the picks are Joey Porter Jr. at 17, DeJuan Jones at 32, and Keanu Benton at 49. Like, I just maybe laid out a mock for you that makes a lot of sense based on what they've done. I think those 3 make a lot of sense to me. DeJuan Jones just feels like the right spot for where they are. They've really targeted absolutely massive dudes to tackle this offseason. It seems to be something they want. They seem to want a real road grader to kind of offset Chooks on the other side because he's not a great run blocker. So it seems like they want a dude that's a real road grader. That's DeJuan Jones. I have a lot of concerns with DeJuan Jones. I'm not even sure DeJuan Jones would beat out Dan Moore year 1, but I think he's a really, really interesting athlete for his size. And those kind of 3 guys are just guys that just peak up every single light bulb you look for in traditional Steelers mocks. Now, It's very possible that Andy Weidel and Omar Khan are going to do things differently. Maybe none of those guys become Steelers. And maybe it's Deontay Banks and Anton Harrison and Gervon Dexter. That's possible. But those three guys just have that profile to me of, yeah, you're probably going to be Steelers. I'll give you an honorary mention. Bryce Ford Wheaton just makes a lot of sense. They love those height, weight, speed guys, and they can probably get him late day 3. Like, that's a Steelers pick too, betting on that type of receiver. So, I mean, that's another guy that I think makes a lot of sense. But those are the three I'll give you. If Joey Porter Jr. is there at 17, I think he's going to be the pick.
Yeah. I would say like you hit on several guys. I have this feeling that before pick 49 is over or at 49, I think the Steelers are going to walk away or already have either Keanu Benton, Gervon Dexter, or Mozzie Smith on the roster. I think one of those three guys, depending on between 32 and 49, they're going to take whichever one of those guys is highest on their boards. I think all three of them make sense to different varieties. I personally like Benton more as a 3-tech, but I know he's played a lot of nose in that Wisconsin front. Dexter is a guy with a ton of athleticism. He's this moldable ball of clay where you can pretty much take him and make him into whatever it is that you want. He's just really, he's really raw in my opinion. And then Mozzie Smith, who I think is the best, probably the best block shedding player in this class. Just absolute hands of dynamite, can quickly shed blocks, and I think he would be a perfect fit for them as a nose tackle and somebody who's capable of playing a ton of snaps like he did at Michigan this past season. So I would add one more guy who I just have like a good feeling about is Dorian Williams from Tulane, linebacker. I know Aaron Curry was there to see his pro day. Really, really like Dorian Williams, and when I think about the fit of what the Steelers could potentially be looking for to round out this inside linebacker group. They brought in Cole Holcomb. Holcomb's a good athlete who's a well-rounded player, maybe doesn't have like a specific top tier elite trait, but he's a solid player against the run. He's solid against the pass. You couple that with the Landon Roberts, who's this smash mouth downhill thumper type linebacker. They don't really have that coverage guy, I don't think, on the roster right now. They recently signed Tanner Muse. He's only played, a handful of defensive snaps over the course of his career. But when I look at Dorian Williams and watch his tape, there's a lot of coverage upside there. Like, he can really move out in space. He's got good zone awareness. He's an extremely good athlete, a little bit undersized, but has some pop to him as well. I think when you add a guy like that in like the 3rd or the 4th round, man, like, that's a perfect fit for this linebacker group. You got Mark Robinson coming into year 2. I think that would be between those 4 guys. I think you can get quality, not top line or anything like that. But I don't think that position group is going to be a liability like it has been at times over the past couple of seasons. So
Yeah, I think, another linebacker that makes sense, Jack Campbell. If they want to go early
I
there.
love me some Jack Campbell.
Yeah, he's a good player, man, and he's very Steelersy. All of they're at his pro day. I'll tell you this: he plays up like, he plays like a juiced up Robert Spillane, and what I mean by that is he does everything Robert Spillane does, but better. With athleticism, and he is a really, really smart player. Better in coverage than people give him credit for, in my opinion. Good
Mm-hmm.
player. I originally watched him, kind of was further down on him, but the more you watch, the more you like him. He's just a really solid football player. Has a really good argument to be top linebacker in the class, honestly. People will probably rank Sanders or Simpson over him, but I think you can make an argument for him to be the top linebacker in the class. I don't know what they're going to do with linebacker. I think that's one of the most fascinating
Yeah.
questions.
That's another position group that I'm not extremely high on, but I do have Campbell at linebacker 1. I just think the film is it's good, man.
Yeah,
It's good.
I'll say this: I think there's a reason the Steelers decided they needed to sign both Landon Roberts and Cole Holcomb. It's not a very good class. Then they brought in Tanner Muse too. I mean, it's not a great room, but I really wouldn't be crying if the entire room was just Holcomb, Roberts, Muse, and Mark Robinson. It's not a great room, but I don't think linebacker is if you have Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts as starting two linebackers, like that is not going to be the make or break group of this team. And I would much rather put in resources to offensive tackle and help out Kenny Pickett or wide receiver in the second, in the mid rounds and help Kenny Pickett. I keep saying this, I think, I haven't been able to explicitly like say it, but the biggest thing that the Steelers need to come out of the draft with is a clear offensive vision that helps Kenny Pickett. They're starting to get there. The signing of Isaac Suamalo, Nate Herbig's there. They brought back Zach Gentry. All right, fill that wide receiver void. Give me something in offensive tackle, and then you have the vision. What do you make? How do you make Kenny Pickett a better quarterback in year 2? I need to see that second year leap from Kenny Pickett, and I need to see the Steelers do as much as they can to get that ecosystem for Kenny Pickett to take that next step. And that's really the biggest thing. It can be with playmakers defensively. It can be with shutdown defenders defensively. It can be with a blindside protector to try and replace Dan Moore. It can be with a really explosive wide receiver like a Jordan Addison. It can be a lot of different ways. Show me, though, how you are going to 100% invest into Kenny Pickett. That's what I need.
And you hit on it earlier too. Like Kenny's going into year 2 of his rookie deal. You've still got years 2, 3, and 4 in terms of cheap, cost controlled, dollars to dollars on the cap with a rookie quarterback. You need to be taking advantage of this too. And I think I think we're probably both on the same page in that like we don't necessarily view the Steelers as like one really good draft away from being like Super Bowl contenders, but like you need to have that mindset of this is a transition, but we need to try to, get this thing up to speed as soon as possible, as quick as possible, to try and contend as early as, 2023, 2024, at least for the division, and catching up to Cincinnati. So all those things are interesting. I'll just add one more thing before we get out of here. I do think it is really interesting to me how much time and resources they've spent on this interior offensive line class. A lot of names that I really like. Talk about Steve Avila. I love Steve Avila's tape. I watched Michigan and the Georgia game, was impressed by him during moments of both those games against really good competition, Jalen Carter, Mozzie Smith. I even like, some of the center options. I still think it's really odd to me, or not odd to me, but I guess it's been surprising to most that they've spent so much time on center capable prospects. Avila's got center experience. You think about their interest in John Michael Schmitz, the attention that they've shown to guys like that. A guy that I really like in the middle rounds, Ricky Stromberg from Arkansas, one of my favorite sleeper kind of day 3, late day 2 kind of guys. So it wouldn't surprise me. I was watching a little bit of tape from the end of the season. I know Mason Cole was banged up. I thought he had a solid year for the Steelers, but I just think that they may be looking for a little bit of an athletic upgrade, I think, maybe to Mason Cole, if that value presents itself.
I mean, is Mason Cole the long-term option at center? Like, I don't think so. I think he's a really good stopgap option. I think he played better than I thought he would last year. I think
me too. Same.
Like, I'll be real. Like, if they don't draft a center, is anyone going to be sad? No, Mason Cole's a really solid player. I'm not sure he's the center of the future. I think that, there's a clear direction with this team that they're trying to really rattle out this offensive line. I really think they're, Andy Weidel came in and Omar Khan, and they looked at this and said, all right, we have Kenny Pickett here. He got concussed twice last year. Let's not overlook that fact. Kenny Pickett got concussed twice last year. Let's protect him. And let's build this offensive line. Let's give Najee Harris the best offensive line he's had in his career. You have this first-round running back that has had to freaking create for himself for 1.5 years of his career, and one of them while doing so with a Liz Frank injury. And then he comes back in the second half of the year, and there he is. Like, that's the Najee Harris you thought you were going to get right from the get-go. And now you have a really nice compliment to him in Jalen Warren. It makes so much sense to me for this team to just all in on offensive tackle. They're in a really interesting spot for offensive tackles. That makes it a little tough. But I think that even increases the likelihood of a Darnell Wright pick at 17. But at 32, they're in a perfect spot to draft John Michael Schmitz, Steve Avila. 49, they're in a good spot too. Even at 80, Luke Whippler, Joe Tippmann. Like, there's a few guys there that you didn't even mention that make a lot of sense for this team. So I look at this group, man. I wouldn't be surprised if they add to that center room. I think it's going to have to be a BPA type of thing, but I think they came into this offseason saying, you know what? Offensive line, we're tired of this. It's tired of putting patchwork on this offensive line. We have a quarterback going into his second year here, coming off 2 concussions. If he's going to make the next step, you have to protect Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, completely agree, man. All right, well, it was pretty good stream. I feel like we got to cover a lot of the topics we were planning on talking about. So, um, just before we get out of here, man, I appreciate you for doing this. Appreciate you for taking the time to come on, talk a little ball with me. It was definitely fun. Reunite on the old OG YouTube duo, me and Nick. So, it was a blast recording this one for you guys. Just before we head out of here, especially if y'all tuned in, please make sure that you like the video. Subscribe to the channel. Drop me a comment on what you guys thought of the stream. Maybe I'll try to do one of these more often for you guys if you guys like this type of content. So appreciate you guys. Y'all have a good rest of your week. Peace.